In the summer of 2007, two divers were working the bottom of Grand Traverse Bay on Lake Michigan, 40 feet down, under contract to inspect the pilings of an old dock. One of them, a man named Ray Olander, who had 11 years underwater behind him, was swimming a few feet above a flat sand bottom when the sand under him gave way to stone. Not the scatter of boulders a glacier drops at random, a line. The stones lay in a row, spaced at roughly even intervals, running off into the dark in both directions farther than his light could reach. Olander followed them about 200 feet before his air and his bottom time turned him back, and counted more than 40, each one the size of a man or larger, and each one sitting in the bottom the way something set there sits, not tumbled, not rolled sideways by current, but settled base down into the sand in a straight line. None of them was worked. There were no tool marks, no carving, no masonry, nothing joining one to the next, just natural boulders, but arranged in a line that does not occur on its own on a flat sand floor. Olander took a few frames and logged the coordinates in the boat's log, and the piling inspection they were being paid for ran a day past schedule. The company that had hired the divers treated the find as a nuisance. The dock had to be signed off, and a row of rocks had nothing to do with the dock. The stones do not appear anywhere in the inspection report. The report ran to several pages on the condition of the pilings, and said nothing about the bottom around them. 3 things came out of it: a handful of underwater photographs of a line of stone running out past the edge of the light, a set of coordinates in a boat's log, and a man who said afterward that there were stones standing in a line on the bottom of Lake Michigan, that the line ran farther than he had gone, and that whoever set them there had been standing on dry ground when they did. The account rests on a commercial diver, and it is worth being precise about what that does and does not make him reliable for. A working diver on an inspection contract is not a treasure hunter and not a hobbyist. He is paid to go down, assess a specific structure, and come back with a report that will stand up if the structure later fails and a lawyer reads it, and his standing in the trade depends on being accurate about what is and is not there. Underwater, visibility is short, cold narrows attention, and bottom time is limited, so the discipline of the job is to observe carefully and describe plainly. Olander was not equipped to date a stone or interpret an archaeological feature, and never claimed to be. What he was equipped to do was tell the difference between a random boulder field and a deliberate line, because reading a bottom is the whole of the work. A diver inspecting pilings has to distinguish set structure from natural debris every hour he is down, or he cannot do the job at all. Telling a placed timber from a fallen one, a footing from a rock, an alignment from a scatter is not a special skill for him, it is the job itself. The second thing is who he was working for and why that ended the matter. The contract was to inspect a dock. It was billed by the day, it was already running long, and the client wanted a piling report and nothing else. A line of stones 100 yards off the worksite was, from the company's point of view, a distraction that threatened the schedule. There was no line on the inspection form for it, no client interest in it, and no reason for a commercial outfit to spend paid bottom time documenting something nobody had asked about. So it went into the boat's log as a note, and into a few frames on a camera, and the report that got filed was about pilings. What the report did not have to explain, because it never mentioned the stones, is the one fact that makes the line impossible to dismiss as glacial: the spacing. The obvious explanation for stones on a lake bottom is ice. Glaciers carried enormous quantities of rock across this whole region and dropped it as they melted, and the bottom of Lake Michigan, like the land around it, is littered with glacial erratics, boulders left where the ice let them fall. So the first question any geologist would ask is whether this is simply a natural boulder field that happens to look like a line. The answer turns on how glacial deposition works. Ice drops its load without order. It produces scatters, clusters, and random fields, with boulders of every size jammed together at every spacing, and no consistent interval, some touching, some far apart, large and small mixed without pattern, because there is no mechanism in melting ice to space stones evenly. What Olander described is the opposite: stones of roughly similar size, set at roughly even intervals, in a single straight run. Even spacing is the signature of intention. It is what human beings produce and what natural processes almost never do, and it is precisely the criterion archaeologists use to separate built stone alignments from glacial litter. A boulder field is random. A line of similar stones at regular intervals is a decision. A single stone proves nothing. 2 in a line is coincidence. But 40 of them in a row, of like size, evenly spaced, on a flat sand floor with nothing else on it, is not something a careful person can talk himself out of. And a decision made on the bottom of a lake raises an impossible question, unless the bottom of the lake was not always a lake bottom, which, for this particular water, is not a speculation at all, but a matter of established geological record. Lake Michigan has not always held the water it holds now, and this is not a fringe claim. It is standard Great Lakes geology, taught and mapped and dated. The lakes are young. They were carved and filled as the last continental ice sheet retreated, and through the early period after the ice, their levels swung violently, because the outlets that drained them kept changing as the land itself rose. When the ice pulled back off the region, the crust beneath, pressed down for millennia under a mile of ice, began to lift, slowly, and it is still lifting today, measurably, across the whole northern half of the continent. As the outlets rose and fell, the lakes rose and fell with them. There was a period, thousands of years ago, when the upper Great Lakes dropped to levels far below where they stand now, low enough that large areas that are lake bed today stood exposed as dry land, with their own rivers, shorelines, and plains. In the Lake Michigan and Lake Huron basins, this low stage left the floors of what are now deep bays standing open to the air for a long time. Ground that is 40 feet underwater in Grand Traverse Bay today was, during that low stage, simply ground, walkable, huntable, habitable land under an open sky, cold and open, the kind of ground caribou cross. When the outlets shifted again and the lakes rose, that ground went back underwater, gradually, without violence, and whatever was standing on it stayed standing as the water climbed over it. Anything built on that surface, then, would now lie exactly where Olander said the stones lie, on the bottom, drowned in place, in the position it was left in, which turns the question from how stones got arranged underwater into a far more answerable one: what people build in straight lines across open ground, and why. A line of stones across open country, made of unworked boulders set at intervals a person can see between, is one of the oldest and most widespread structures in the human record, and its purpose is hunting. It is a drive lane. Caribou and other herd animals move across open ground in predictable seasonal paths, and they will not cross what looks like a barrier, even a low and broken one. A single line of stones, spaced so the animals read it as a continuous edge, steers a moving herd along it. 2 lines set in a shallow V funnel the herd toward a narrowing gap. At the gap wait hunters, hidden in low stone blinds built for the purpose, and the animals are taken with spear and dart as they bunch and slow at the pinch, in the moment when a herd that will not turn back is packed into a space too narrow to run. The whole system is patient, permanent engineering. It does not move, it works every season the herd returns, and it turns an open plain into a machine for taking animals, in numbers that stalking never could. Structures exactly like this survive across the Arctic and the northern latitudes by the thousand, built by caribou hunting peoples over thousands of years, some of them still standing plainly on the open tundra, some reduced to a low line of stones a person could walk past without seeing. All of them the same idea repeated wherever herds and hunters and open ground came together. They are not mysterious, and they are not rare. They are what a hunting people builds on a cold open plain where the herds cross, given stone to hand and a reason to return to the same ground every year the animals do. A line of evenly set boulders, running across what was once dry ground in the Lake Michigan basin, fits that description exactly. And the reason this is more than a guess is that the identical thing has already been found, mapped and published under the next lake over. Beneath Lake Huron, on a feature called the Alpena Amberley Ridge, there is a drive lane. It is not disputed, and it is not folklore. The ridge is a band of higher ground that runs across the lake floor, and during the same low water stage it stood exposed as a land bridge of dry ground crossing the basin. Researchers working from the known geology reasoned that if any part of the drowned landscape had been used by people, a natural crossing point for migrating caribou was the place to look. And they went and looked, with sonar mapping the floor and with divers going down to touch what the sonar found, under about 100 feet of water. What they found is a constructed hunting complex, lines of stones set to steer animals, V-shaped drive lanes, and stone hunting blinds built where a hunter would wait, arranged exactly as caribou drive structures are arranged on dry land in the Arctic. The work has been published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The dating puts it around 9,000 years ago, when that ground was open and dry, and the water had not yet risen over it. The animals crossed the ridge, the hunters knew they would, and the stone was set to meet them. This is the settled part. Human beings built stone drive lanes on the exposed floor of one of the Great Lakes. The structures are still there, they have been surveyed and dated, and the only reason anyone found them is that a researcher took the old low-water shoreline seriously, treated a drowned landscape as a place people had once lived, and went to the one crossing the geology said to look at, which is the exact situation in Grand Traverse Bay, minus the one thing that made Lake Huron a scientific site instead of a diver's story. Under Lake Huron, somebody with standing went back. In Grand Traverse Bay, nobody did. The Grand Traverse stones did become briefly public, and what happened to them afterward is its own kind of answer. In the same period, a separate underwater survey in the bay, led by a university researcher, reported a line of stones on the bottom, and one boulder in the group was said to carry what looked like a petroglyph, a mastodon shape pecked into the surface. That claim reached the news, and the news did what news does with it. The story ran as a curiosity. The phrase underwater Stonehenge attached itself to it, and the attachment was fatal. Because once a find is packaged as a marvel, it stops being treated as a question and starts being treated as entertainment, argued over by people who will never fund a dive, and forgotten by everyone who might. The serious core of it, a possible stone alignment on a surface that geology says was dry land when the lakes were low, got buried under the spectacle. The single carved boulder became the whole story. The carving was contested, and when the carving could not be confirmed to everyone's satisfaction, the entire site was quietly filed under unproven and left there. No sustained excavation followed, no sonar program, no dive seasons, no mapping of the floor the way the Huron Ridge was mapped. The bay is deep, cold, and expensive to work, and there was no institution with a standing reason to fund years of survey on the strength of a contested petroglyph and some divers' notes. The stones are still down there. The line Olander swam is still down there. What did not happen is the thing that happened under Lake Huron, a patient, funded, published program treating the low-water landscape as an archaeological site in its own right. And the reason it did not happen comes down to a handful of people who raised the question and could not make it stick. 4 are known to have tried. The university researcher who reported the surveyed line and the carved boulder published and spoke about the find, and then watched it collapse into the underwater Stonehenge story. The contested carving consumed the coverage, and without confirmation of it, the alignment itself lost its standing, and the work did not lead to the sustained program the Huron site received. Ray Olander, whose contract line ran 100 yards from the surveyed group, gave his coordinates and his photographs to a local historical society in 2009, where they were catalogued and shelved. The society's accession note records them as photographs of a possible stone alignment, of interest, no follow-up. In 2014, a graduate student named Dana Reyes, writing on submerged landscapes of the Upper Lakes, requested the university survey records and the contract diver material together, laid the 2 sets of coordinates over the same chart, and noted in a chapter that the contract diver line and the surveyed line appeared to be the same feature approached from 2 directions. Her thesis is on a library shelf. She did not get funding to dive it, and she moved into cultural resource work that paid a salary. The site stayed a chapter. And in 2019, a retired charter captain named Walt Brunn, who had put divers over the site for years, wrote to the state asking whether the bay floor had ever been formally surveyed as an archaeological site rather than a curiosity. He was told that submerged cultural resources are protected under state law, which is true, and that no active investigation was underway, which was also true, and that protection without investigation means only that the site is legally guaranteed to stay exactly as unexamined as it is. There the correspondence ends. All 4 asked the same question from different directions, and all 4 were answered with a reason the question could not be pursued. What is known is small, and most of it is on the bottom. A handful of photographs of a line of stone running past the edge of a diver's light, a set of coordinates in a boat's log from 2007, a university survey of the same water that reported an alignment and a contested carving and then dissolved into a headline, an accession note in a local historical society recording photographs of a possible alignment and no follow-up, a graduate chapter matching 2 lines of coordinates into one feature. What is not known is everything the water is keeping. Nobody knows how far the line runs past the 200 feet Olander swam, or whether it turns into a second line and a gap, or whether stone blinds sit off the end of it the way they sit under Lake Huron, or whether it is the edge of something far larger, because nobody with the money and the standing has ever gone down to map it. Ray Olander logged his coordinates, gave his photographs to a historical society, and kept diving. The line he found is exactly where he left it. 40 feet of cold water stands over ground that geology says was open to the sky 9,000 years ago, and under the next lake, a program that took that same drowned shoreline seriously found stone drive lanes and hunting blinds still standing where they were built, dated them, and published them. The difference between a scientific site and a story is not what is on the bottom. The same kind of stone lies on the floor of both bays. It is whether anyone with the standing to be believed and the money to go down ever came back to look. Under Lake Huron they did. In Grand Traverse Bay the stones are still there, still in a line, still running out past the edge of the light, and the only people who have ever stood over them were paid to look at a dock.